Greetings, everybody. Good afternoon. This is VFI Educates, episode number 259. And we are blessed today to see Dan Pomerantz visiting with us again. Just a couple of very quick announcements. The first is that captioning is available on this video. If you can figure out how to do it at the bottom of your screen, the captioning acts in real time. Secondly, this is being recorded and it will be up on YouTube in a day or two for reviewing if anybody would want. And the way you would get it would go to youtube.com/volunteers for Israel, and you'll find hundreds of our past videos there. This will be the newest one. Secondly, we do have a new video up which summarizes the Volunteers for Israel current experience. And it happens to be on YouTube, but I'll give you an address that you can use to get to it. It's tinyurl.com/VFI video, one word. And what we've done there is put together basically a sales pitch. Runs about 5 minutes, and it explains the 6 different programs and the different advantages and benefits of attending any of or all of them. And you're welcome to look at it. It might raise questions, in which case we're in a good place to answer them. So that is a quick summary. I'm going to ask Ilana if she has anything to announce today.
I don't have anything else to announce. If you have questions for Dan, please feel free to put them in the chat and we will answer them after he's done talking.
Great.
I think we're fine. I think Pam's doing the intro.
Yeah. Pam would be so kind as to introduce us again to Daniel, and you're on mute. You're on mute.
Okay. I think we have some new people on this that have not really listened to too many of the VFI Educates. So for those people, Dan is a new speaker, but for most of you, you've heard Dan speak with us many, many times already on a variety of subjects, all having to do with current events, the good old term, current events in Israel. Dan made Aliyah several years ago. How many, Dan? 12?
14.
14. Oh my gosh, each time it gets 14 years ago when he first came from Chicago. He did Sarel many times, and that's how I got to know him, and that's how a lot of our regular people got to know him. And he then since became very well known in the journalistic venue in Israel. He has spoken many times on I-24 News, and as well as foreign stations and things in the stations in the US, TV and Zooms and radios, publications. He's a professor at Bar Ilan University and also the IDC, both in Israel. He lives in Tel Aviv, and he is currently the CEO of RealityCheck, a relatively new company that Dan will also talk about. And that's that. So hope you all enjoy it.
Thanks, Pamela.
So, hi. It's so really wonderful to be here and to see all of you again. I do this every probably every few months, and it's always really a pleasure. I'm looking, Ilana, to see if I can make a poll, because I thought I'd do some polling today, but I don't see the icon there.
How do you do that?
I don't know. Might be you might be able to enable the feature if you're the host. You're the admin.
We don't have to enable it before or something. I didn't make the meeting. Steve, did you see that as an option when you made the meeting? I want to figure this out because
We've never done it before. It's probably out there. There's 1,000 options in here.
Where is it usually found, Dan?
I usually find it in that toolbar at the bottom.
Yeah. I'm looking at the host tools, and it's not there.
Okay.
It might be something we have to initiate prior to the program itself.
So we might not be able to do that today.
I'll look it up right now. I'll see if I can get it to work.
Take a look while I'm talking, sure. And if you come up with it, then we can do that.
I'll let you know. Okay.
But for those who don't know me, or even for those who do, and I feel like showing off a little bit, I'm going to share a little video of some of the work that I've done over all this time since October 7th. It didn't ask me if I wanted to share with sound, so I assume this has sound, but if it doesn't, somebody wave at me and shout at me, and I'll make sure the sound gets on.
Now to talk more, I'm joined in studio by Daniel Pomerantz.
Dan Pomerantz, live from Tel Aviv.
Daniel Pomerantz joins us.
Daniel Pomerantz.
Daniel Pomerantz.
Daniel Pomerantz.
Daniel Pomerantz.
You're inside 10 seconds.
Israel has a civilian to combatant casualty ratio here that is literally the lowest in human history for a conflict of this type. If we accuse a country that is being this careful, it sends a terrible message to the world that being careful doesn't matter and that terrorism works.
You have just been moved to a bomb shelter. What's going on around you?
Right now, we hear rocket fire above us. We hear booms.
Daniel, so good to have you here. This reporting is so important.
But there are countries in the world that actively, outrightly teach racism. You can't help but feel just how powerful you really are. Now, of course, South Africa's case for genocide is absurd, and South Africa knows that. Hamas is weaponizing that convention to try and defeat the IDF off the battlefield.
Sound is gone.
That's a little bit of some of the work that I did. Everyone could see and hear clearly? Yeah? Okay, good. So yeah, now we're in this, I had this funny conversation with a friend of mine who's, she's Jewish, American, very liberal, very pro-Israel, but very into that connection between Jewish values and liberal values. And she's out here on a tour for work, looking at environmental related tech and ways that Israel is a part of doing good things for the environment. And she says to me something that I think is probably on a lot of people's minds, which is, you know, I hate Trump because of everything he stands for, and he's so problematic in so many areas, but he keeps making decisions that I agree with, and I'm not sure what to do about that. And I said to her, what I frequently say to myself and to others, which is I don't support people or oppose people. I support policies and I oppose policies. Let's not forget that in World War II, the Soviet Union fought against the Nazis. That was the right policy. Does that mean I support the Soviet Union? No, but it was the right policy. And I'm not going to oppose the policy of fighting Hitler, which is clearly the right thing to do, just because the wrong country is doing it. And so I think that's something that we can all do. On election day, we have to pick a person. There's no way to avoid that. But between election days, we support policies or we oppose policies. And so I'd encourage you all to do that. And if you're a Democrat and you like some of the things Trump is doing, the best way to get Trump out of office is to try and convince the Democratic Party and the people in your community who are Democrats to support the right policies. And that will make the Democrat Party more attractive in the areas that are important to you. And really, ultimately, Israel should be a bipartisan issue, and it shouldn't matter what party you pick when it comes to Israel. But if there are differences between the parties, then it's our job to be active in our communities and change that. So policies, not people. And so I want to make sure that that's clear, that as we go through this, you may hear me support certain policies or oppose certain policies. And it doesn't mean I'm expressing an opinion one way or another on the person who is carrying out that policy. It's an opinion on the policy itself. And so with that said, if I had a poll right now, I would like to ask everybody, what do you think about this, the latest issue, which I assume is on everybody's minds, because what people are talking about, that this former student from Colombia who was a big agitator on campus named Mahmoud Khalil, was a big pro-Hamas guy, is now being deported. His visa, he was a permanent resident and a green card holder. His visa was canceled by the Trump administration, and now ICE, the immigration authorities, have taken him into custody pending deportation. But the deportation has been temporarily delayed as his case is going to court, and his lawyers and a lot of the people who support him are making the argument that he's only exercising his First Amendment right to free speech. And there are even a lot of people in the Jewish community who are saying, I may not agree with what he says, but free speech is important, and I don't think we should be deporting people for exercising their First Amendment rights. And so the question I would have made a poll on is, how do you feel about that? But since I can't poll you, I'll just let you think your answer in your mind. And then I'll give you a little legal analysis. And this is the sort of work that we're doing, the things that we're writing about. The first thing you do whenever you do a legal analysis, because this is a legal question, the First Amendment is a law. The Constitution is the law of the land in the United States. So we're talking about law here. The question is, first of all, what is the area of law that we're talking about? And that's the first question whenever you talk about a legal issue. The second question is, what are the legal standards in place? Basically, what are the rules under this law? Now that we know what law we're talking about, what are the rules under this law? And then the third question is, what are the facts of this case? And how do those facts fit in to the specific rules of this law that we're talking about? And so the answer to the first question is, we're talking about the INA, which is the Immigration and Nationality Act. That's the area of law we're talking about. The INA has a whole bunch of rules, but basically when you get a visa to visit the United States, including a green card, including permanent residence, that is a kind of a visa. A tourist visa is a visa, a student visa is a visa. They're all different kinds of visas. So you have this visa to visit the United States. And then the next question is, what are the terms of that visa? What are you allowed to do? So for example, if you come on a tourist visa and you start working at a job, you've violated the terms of your visa because you don't have a work visa. And then you can be deported from the United States. But there are a lot of other terms, things that you can and can't do. And one of the terms of a visa under the INA, including a green card, is that you are not allowed to do certain things. And one of them is you can be deported if you are, and I quote here, a representative of a political, social, or other group that endorses or espouses terror activity, or endorses or espouses terrorist activity, or persuades others to endorse or espouse terrorist activity or to support a terrorist organization. So now that we know the standards of law, the question is, was Khalil doing any of those things? Was he endorsing or espousing terrorists or terrorist activity, or was he the representative of an organization that does that? Well, Khalil is a representative of an organization called Columbia University Apartheid Divest. The acronym is QUAD. And he's spoken on their behalf on the news. He's a senior organizer for them. He negotiates on their behalf with campus officials. And one of the things that QUAD does is they speak very much in favor of the October 7th massacre. They say that it was Yahya Sinwar's crowning achievement. They say that it was a beautiful expression of resistance. And so they're speaking in favor of the October 7th massacre. So let's deal with some of these questions. Is the October 7th massacre an act of terrorism? I don't think that's a hard question to figure out. It is an act of terrorism. It was the largest murder of Jews since the Holocaust. It included mass rape, mass torture, mass hostage taking. It is an act of terrorism. And both Khalil himself and the organization that Khalil represents, and it's very clear that he represents them. He represents them on the news. He negotiates on their behalf with campus. He represents them. If you represent an organization that supports terrorist activity, that's a violation of the visa. He definitely represents that organization, and that organization is definitely supporting terrorist activity. The organization also endorses, and espouses Hamas. Hamas is listed on the United States list of proscribed terror organizations. There's no matter of opinion here. If you're on the list, you're a terrorist organization, and they definitely endorse or espouse Hamas. Notice I didn't say support, right? Because there's an entirely different law that says you cannot support a terror organization. Even it's not a matter of visas. Even a citizen cannot support a terror organization. That's a criminal offense. You go to prison for that. Supporting a terror organization under those laws means providing what's called material support. That means like money, weapons, things like that. But the rule under visas is that you cannot even endorse or espouse. Endorsing or espousing means speaking on their behalf. So the question is, if you're speaking on behalf of a terror organization, don't you have a First Amendment right to speak whatever you want? And the answer to that has to come not from the law, but from the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court takes the laws however they're written and then examines, does this law meet the requirements of the Constitution. And there is a whole long line of Supreme Court cases in which the Supreme Court has very clearly said that you do not have a First Amendment right to violate the terms of your visa. One example that I wrote about was Heresides versus Shaughnessy. It's a 1952 case where someone was being deported for being a member of the Communist Party. Another, Reno versus the Arab American Anti-Discrimination Committee. That was in 1999. And they were deporting a bunch of people who were actual members of PFLP, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, which is also designated as a terror organization. And in both cases, they said, well, we have this First Amendment right. And in both cases, the court said, the Supreme Court said, number one, you don't have a First Amendment right to violate the terms of your visa. And number two, the courts, we are ruling as the Supreme Court that the court system of America does not have the authority to question White House policy on these particular issues, on whether someone has violated their visa. So both from the case of statutory law and Supreme Court case law, it is very clear that Khalil did not have a right to do this. And the chances, so now it's in court, but the court has to follow the precedent of the Supreme Court. So in all likelihood, the government will win and he'll be deported. But if they don't, the government will appeal and eventually it will make it to the Supreme Court, at which point the government will win and he'll be deported. And the important thing is, you know, I hear people saying, but I feel like it's free speech and I'm more in favor of free. Here's the thing I want to make very clear about law. Law isn't what you feel in your heart. You could feel that the laws of America are wrong and should be changed. You could say, I think the law should be different than what it is. But you don't get to say, I think the law is different than what it is. If I drive 100 miles per hour in a 25 mile per hour zone, I can't go to court and be like, well, I believe that the speed limit there was actually 100 miles an hour. No, you don't get to do that. You can say, I believe the speed limit should be faster, but you can't say, I believe the speed limit is faster. That's called being delusional. So let's not be delusional. The law says what it's. Now, there are some cases where the law is not clear. There are some cases where laws and precedents get overruled. But in this case, the law is quite clear. And if Khalil's lawyers, if they want him to stay, are going to have to find something in the case law that says the opposite of what I just described. And I'm not saying it couldn't be out there, but I certainly haven't found it yet. I also know one of the things they're going to argue, because they've mentioned it in the news, is that they're going to argue that he didn't actually represent the Quad organization. But of course, there's like video of him on the news speaking as a representative of that organization. So that's going to be a hard case to make. So that's where we are right now. And if anyone has any questions about that, please feel free to share it in the comments. So now I'd like to talk about a few other interesting things that have happened. One thing is, this is a little bit less connected to American politics, but it's important. We just did a research study. We got a little bit of funding, and we want to raise some more to do dark web, deep web, and OSINT research. OSINT means open source intelligence. And using these tools, we were able to find something that no one else had. See, when I analyze the law, I'm taking what's already out there, an event that happened. I'm taking the law, which is already out there, and I'm using my knowledge and education to do an analysis. And that's useful because it's something that maybe you didn't see before. But I'm still using things that are already out there. In this case, with the International Red Cross, we used something that wasn't out there, that nobody had before. And what we actually did was we examined, the thing about the International Red Cross is that they meet with terror organizations and dictators all the time. But they say that's okay because we're neutral. If there are civilians there that need food, if there are prisoners or hostages, we are there to help civilians, to help bring out hostages. And sometimes that means you have to deal with dictators because or with terror groups, because that's where the need is. And in theory, that makes a lot of sense if you truly are being neutral. Now, there are a lot of Israelis and Israel supporters who have been saying in over 500 days, almost 18 months now, since the hostages were taken, the International Red Cross has never visited them once. And if they don't get to see Palestinian terrorists in Israeli prisons for like one day, they sound the alarm and start speaking out throughout the whole world about this is a violation. But we haven't heard them sounding that alarm about Hamas not allowing them to see the hostages. We've heard stories about hostages saying that when they were picked up by the Red Cross, they were scolded by them. How dare you not care more about Palestinians? These hostages being taken out of tunnels. So So we've often had this feeling that the Red Cross is not truly neutral. And that's a big deal, because if they're not truly neutral, then their entire justification for meeting with terrorists and dictators is no longer valid. And now they're just an organization that's out there supporting terrorism. And that's a violation of international law. So are they truly neutral? And, we say this, well, they haven't visited the hostages, and they say, but we can't. Hamas won't let us. We've tried. We continue to try. You can't blame us for something Hamas did. And whether you believe them or not, it's not what you can believe, right? It's what you can prove. And so we set out to see if we couldn't prove something. And as we set out to do that, we began discovering some really interesting things. Let me see if I can do a share here again. Hang on just a moment. Okay, this.
Not letting. Okay, good.
There we go. This is a photograph from an Arab language news source of, on the left is Peter Maurer, who's the president of the International Red Cross. And on the right, everybody know who that is? That's the late Yahya Sinwar, leader of Hamas and architect of the October 7th massacre. This photograph was taken on May 9th, 2017. We did a lot of digging, and what we discovered was a few things. Number one, we have examples of the International Red Cross meeting with members of Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and in these meetings, they're talking about things like they discussed, quote, the role of the International Committee of the Red Cross in pressuring the Israeli occupation, and, quote, efforts to expose the crimes of the Israeli occupation. In another meeting that they had, this was a meeting with Hamas. And at that meeting, the representative of the International Red Cross said, our first priority is the release of Palestinian prisoners from Israeli jails. Now, there's two problems with that. Number one, you're supposed to be neutral. If releasing Palestinian prisoners is your first priority, does that mean Israeli hostages are a lower priority or not a priority at all? Does that mean protecting Israeli civilians from terror attacks is a lower priority or not a priority at all? If they said in clear terms, this is our first priority. What they're supposed to say is we are neutral. We have several priorities. This is one of them. That's not what they said. Another thing that they said is that they referred to also the other problem with that statement is that most of the people who are Palestinian who are held in Israeli jails are people who were convicted of committing acts of terrorism. The International Red Cross should not be trying to get convicted terrorists out of jail. Israel doesn't hold hostages. Israel convicts terrorists. Now, if the Red Cross can find a specific case in which it makes the case that Israel convicted someone wrongly, you can talk about that specific case. But that's not what the Red Cross said. Their top priority is releasing Palestinians from Israeli jails, apparently no matter what they did, including terrorists, which means that puts Israelis in danger by putting terrorists back out on the street. Again, not an example of neutrality. And another in conversation, one of the Red Cross officials referred to Palestinians who die as martyrs. Martyrs, as you know, in Islamic tradition, is someone who dies for their faith or for a noble cause. And in this case, the noble cause for which many of these martyrs died was to kill Israelis, or in the attempt to kill Israelis. And so referring to them as martyrs is referring to them in the way that terror organizations refer to them, and implicitly supporting what they do. And they've also referred to Israel as the occupation authorities, which is the way you refer to Israel when you're an Israeli enemy. So again, an example of the Red Cross being an enemy. And then here's another thing I found: an employee for the Red Cross posted this photo on her Facebook, and this is this photo. The caption here is May God have mercy on the martyrs. Congratulations on your martyrdom in heaven. Well, who are these martyrs? These martyrs are, they look like young boys, and they are, but that doesn't mean that they're just kids out of school who got killed for doing nothing. The people in this picture are Ahmed Dragmeh, who's the commander of the Tubas Battalion of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Mahmoud al-Saadi of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad's violent Al-Quds Brigade, Wadi Abu Ramos, who was shot while throwing firebombs at Israeli police, and Muhammad Turkman, who was one of the perpetrators of a violent terror attack against Israelis known as the Jordan Valley Operation. And this is a Red Cross employee saying, "May God have mercy on the martyrs. Congratulations on your martyrdom in heaven." And so we're doing work like this, and the idea is as we build up a critical mass, we are in touch with on our mailing list, which some of you get, and if you don't, you should. Please sign up for it. We also have several hundred people who are either members of Congress or staffers of members of Congress in the House and in the Senate. We have a number of state-level officials. We have parliamentarians from a number of European governments, and they follow our stuff and they consult with us on relevant issues. And the next goal of ours, the next project we're undertaking, is to take this research and make it clear to the donor nations, to the International Red Cross, that the International Red Cross is not living up to its standards of neutrality, and it therefore does not have that justification to be meeting with dictators and terrorists, and is therefore violating international law by doing so. And we found in the past that when we do this kind of work, it does have an impact, and it changes policy and it changes people's minds. And speaking about it publicly is important too, because people generally think that the Red Cross is a very trustworthy organization. And when they learn new things, then it changes the way they think of it, which is important because when the International Red Cross says horrible things about Israel, if you believe that they're very trustworthy, then you might believe the things they're saying. If you know that they're not trustworthy, then maybe you won't believe it quite as readily. So that is the International Red Cross. Also, I'm going to show you this on the topic of Trump and policy. I'm going to show you this little graph. It's something that by the way, I want to point out that everything I'm saying was written in various articles that we've published. So if you're on our mailing list, you've gotten them already. And if you're not on our mailing list, you should get on it, but also we'll send out an email later with links to the various articles. So you might say, hey, where did you find that picture? I want a link to the picture. I'm not going to send you a link to the picture. I'm not going to send you a link to the law. I'm going to send you a link to the article I wrote. And in the article, you then have links to everything in a very organized fashion. So the article will go through all the laws related to immigration and all the cases, and there's links to every case. And I'm very diligent about links, especially when I write about law. I'm just chock full of links in my writing. So you can click on everything. I almost never say anything without some sort of outside support for it. So speaking of research, here's a little graph that we produced here. As you can see, this is the last, and the blue is the last 6 weeks of the Biden administration. In the red is the first month of the Trump administration. And as you can see, for the end of the Biden administration, we were running to bomb shelters pretty frequently, sometimes several times a day. And then on Inauguration Day, that number went down to 0. And even though this graph only goes up through February 1st, right now it's March 13th, and that number has stayed at 0 ever since then. Exactly 0 sirens, 0 running to the bomb shelter, which means we get sirens whether it's a rocket or a missile, or also a drone can trigger a siren. And we've had none of that since that time. Now, why did this happen? Well, one reason people might point to is they say, well, on January 19th, the day before Inauguration Day, we entered a ceasefire agreement, so that's why. That's not why. Because Hamas, the ceasefire agreement was with Hamas. Hamas already wasn't firing during those 6 weeks in the blue there. None of those are Hamas rockets, because by that time, the IDF had degraded Hamas so much that they already couldn't fire anymore. All the rockets you see there are coming either from Hezbollah in Lebanon or from the Houthis in Yemen. And of course, if you go back a couple months earlier to October, you also get the Iranian attack. And these groups Well, Hezbollah signed a ceasefire agreement last November, but they never honored it. And they had been firing ever since until January 20th. The Houthis have said, even after January 20th, the Houthis said that they will continue firing on Israel until they liberate every inch of Palestine, which of course means all of Israel, not just, Judea, Samaria, or Gaza. And yet they also stopped firing on January 20th. And then the really interesting thing is on January 24th, Iran made a statement, and their statement was that they are encouraging all of their proxies to exercise restraint and not do anything that would be provocative because, and this is what the Iranians said, because we are in existential fear of what the Trump administration will do to our country. Existential fear means they fear no longer existing. And so I think the message here is clear. You don't have to like Trump. You don't have to vote for Trump. You don't have to support Trump. But before Trump took office, he started talking about maximum pressure on Iran. He started talking about hell to pay. He wasn't talking about stability. He wasn't talking about balance. He wasn't talking about all sides getting along. He was talking about hell to pay. And the day he was inaugurated, Iran, the Houthis, Hezbollah, and Hamas all stopped firing for the first time, and I, for the first time, stopped running to bomb shelters. So I'm not saying I like Trump. All I'm saying is that I was running to bomb shelters before, and I'm not running to bomb shelters now. You don't have to like the person, but the policy is that the way you get stability is by being firm about these things, not by, when you talk about stability, you get rockets. When you talk about hell to pay, you get stability. And that is the lesson we've seen from the facts on the ground, and the lesson that I've been living in terms of running versus not running to bomb shelters. Now, of course, it's possible that we may end up back in a war footing pretty soon because hostages aren't being released, and it looks like we're not getting an agreement with Hamas. And once that happens, it's possible that there will be sirens and rockets again. But what we know so far is based on the January 24th announcement by Iran, they are encouraging their proxies to not do anything provocative because not because of the ceasefire, but because and this is what Iran is saying, not what I'm saying, because they feel that they are in existential danger of what Trump will do to them if they fire on Israel or on the United States. So now here's another really difficult question that people have been struggling with, especially American Jews. A couple of weeks ago, Israel announced that it is cutting off the flow of humanitarian aid into Gaza. Gaza is still getting electricity and water provided by Israel, but they're not getting food anymore. So the question is, how do we feel about that? And if I had the polling thing, I'd do a poll and we'd see how we all feel about that. But for now, you can just think about your answer in your mind. I put some serious thought into this topic and also into relevant international law. And remember I said, how do we analyze? I'm going to talk about international law, but this isn't just a technical argument here, because what happens on the reason international law is structured the way it is because it's based on certain values, certain principles of how we want the world to look. So talking about the international law means also talking about the human values behind those laws. And so I will address both, but I will do it through the framework of law, and we'll touch on the values. So why would Israel have to bring humanitarian aid into Gaza at all? The answer is because Israel has a blockade on Gaza. It is a legal blockade. Legal blockades are governed by the Geneva Conventions, the Hague Conventions, and the San Remo Convention. And based on those blockades, you are allowed to legally blockade a territory if it is as a defense against physical armed attack. And in this case, it definitely is. Israel pulled all of its settlers out of Gaza in 2005. Hamas promptly took over and promptly started firing rockets at Israel. Israel put the blockade in place in 2007 in order to prevent Hamas from getting more and more rockets, and has maintained the blockade ever since, even as Hamas has continued to fire rockets. So clearly, this is in response to an armed attack, because firing rockets is definitely an armed attack. So under all of the international laws that I mentioned, this blockade is legal and appropriate. But there is also a principle in international law that you are not allowed to use starvation of civilians as a weapon, which means, so the law doesn't actually say you have to provide humanitarian aid, but in effect, that's what it means. Because if you're putting on a blockade, people are going to starve unless you allow the flow of food. So in that sense, the various laws regarding blockades do effectively require transferring food in there. However, and this is really important, Article 23 of the Fourth Geneva Convention states that a power is not required to allow the passage of humanitarian aid unless it is satisfied that the aid will not be diverted to enemy combatants. Now, we know that Hamas has been stealing all or very close to all of this aid. We know that Hamas uses the aid to fuel their rockets, which they then fire on people like me. We know that Hamas uses the aid to supply and equip their troops. And we also know that Hamas sells some of that aid at highly inflated prices to Palestinian civilians in order to fund their own military machine. And so we know all of this is happening. That means there is no question here, this isn't up for debate, that the aid is absolutely, definitely being diverted to enemy combatants. This has been confirmed, by the way, by multiple international bodies, including the UN itself, including UNRWA, for all their problems, have admitted that this is true. And of course, there's tons of photographic evidence of Hamas beating people up and torturing people for daring to take food for themselves. So there's absolutely no requirement in international law to provide aid to enemy combatants. And there's a reason for that. And this is where it relates to values. Essentially, what Israel's been doing up until now is funding both sides of this war. How can you win a war when you're funding both sides of it? It's like what they used to say about the war on drugs in America. On the one hand, we're fighting the war. On the other hand, we're the ones buying the drugs, which fund the other side. You can't win a war when you're funding both sides. And that's the value, because what happens when you fund both sides of a war? The war never ends, and it becomes increasingly violent, and it harms civilians on all sides. And we don't want that happening. Sometimes the best way to end a war is to win that war, especially if you're fighting against someone who should lose, like an internationally designated terror organization that oppresses the people of Gaza as well. And so if you don't want to keep Hamas in power, you cannot be providing humanitarian aid that gets diverted to Hamas. Also, when you think about it, if you don't provide that aid, it doesn't really make much difference to civilians because they were never getting the aid in the first place, except for the few civilians who have enough money to buy aid from Hamas. So for all of these reasons, both international law and common sense and basic human values state that this war will end faster, the hostages will come home sooner, Palestinians will be better off if we stop funding both sides of this conflict, if we stop funding Hamas. And then the last topic that I want to throw out here, and then I'll go to questions. So I see some are already popping into the chat. If you have more questions, please throw them in there. I know this is a hard one for a lot of American Jews. What about this plan coming out of the White House to evacuate Gaza, to take all the Palestinians out of Gaza and move them to somewhere else? And I know that sometimes people have conflicted feelings about that. Let's start by telling you this. However you feel about it, which is completely respectable, you should know that Israelis almost universally agree that this is the right thing to do. And to be clear, Israelis never agree on anything. We've got like a dozen different political parties. Nobody gets a majority when they win. That's why we have coalitions in our government. We have protests on our street constantly. There are protests every night over near the Azrieli Mall by Kaplan Street, protesting that Bibi isn't doing enough to bring home hostages, and others protesting the other side, that he's not doing enough to fight Hamas. And this happens every single day. You remember judicial reform a couple of years ago. We are constantly arguing and protesting. So when Israelis agree on something, you better take note of that, because it's definitely unusual. And if you disagree with Israelis, you can do that. But you should still, first of all, realize that you're disagreeing with almost all Israelis. And you should, second of all, at the very least, ask yourself, why is that? Is there something Israelis know that I don't? Because I don't think the answer is that Israelis are all cold-hearted bastards who want to commit ethnic cleansing. I mean, unless you believe that, you have to believe that there's something Israelis are thinking about that maybe you should at least be considering, and then let that inform your opinion. It might not change your opinion, but it should at least enrich your opinion. To be specific, 73% of Israelis support this. That includes 97% of Israeli Jews, and almost half of Israeli Arabs support moving all Palestinians out of Gaza. Another thing you probably didn't know is that a lot of Palestinians in Gaza agree with this too. A lot of, we don't have, it's hard to get good data right now, but we know that before October 7th, so before this war, back when Gaza was a much less difficult place to live, 44% of young Palestinians living in Gaza wanted to leave, and about 35% of the population as a whole wanted to leave. Many try to leave. Hamas holds them in place at gunpoint. People risk their lives and sometimes lose their lives to leave. But of those people who had enough luck to get through and enough money to bribe Egyptian officials on the border, over 100,000 Palestinians in Gaza have already bribed their way out. That's out of a population of 2 million. So fully 5% of the population has already left. And we know that we don't have specific polling, but we know that many, many more are interested in leaving. So that's the first thing. At the very least, I think we should all be able to agree that if Palestinians want to leave, we ought to allow them to leave. We shouldn't let Hamas stop them, and we shouldn't let all the countries in the Arab world stop them. But the reason the countries in the Arab world stop them is, they'll make some talk about how they believe in the Palestinian cause. But Egypt recently pointed out that allowing Palestinians to come live in Egypt would be, and I quote, a threat to Egyptian national security. That was a statement by the president of Egypt. So they clearly, the Arab world sees what Israel sees, which is this is a threat to the safety of the people who are living next to them. Another thing that's important to know is that Palestinian civilians in Gaza overwhelmingly support the October 7th massacre and overwhelmingly support the idea of doing it again. People in Gaza have a sense that they've actually won something because lately, as part of the ceasefire, Israel is withdrawing from the Netzarim corridor, which divides southern and northern Gaza. So a lot of Palestinians are moving from the south back to the north, and Hamas is pitching this as a victory. We pushed the occupying power back. We got our homes back. But Hamas also said something else. Hamas said that this is just the first step, is going back to the north. But the next step is going back to our real homes, which are inside of Israel. Hamas has been very clear. Our home is not Gaza. Palestinian people and the United Nations have been very clear that Gaza is mostly refugee camps. And they say that very clearly. We are refugees. They are refugees. There are entire cities in Gaza with infrastructure and buildings and plumbing and electricity that are officially termed by the United Nations as refugee camps. You think of a camp as a place with tents, but that's not the case. So this is also very important. If you are a refugee, that's not your home. And if that's your home, then you're not a refugee. So if Palestinians are refugees, why in the world would it be wrong for other countries to accept them into refugee camps that are nicer, better, safer? And if your argument is that would tear them away from their home and from their land and from their homeland, then why are you calling them refugees? Either you're a refugee or you're at home. So, under international law, in some cases, people have a right to stay in their homes. Not always, but often. There is no case in international law where a person has a right to stay in their favorite refugee camp. And so that's an important distinction here. In terms of international law, the rules regarding this are, just a moment. I have this written down in my article here. All right, well, I seem to have, I don't know if, I'm not finding offhand the specific law here, but here we go. I was looking at the wrong article. I have two articles on this topic, and one of them delves into the law and the other delves into other things. All right, so the Geneva Convention, Fourth Geneva Convention, Article 49, says that you are not allowed to forcibly displace a population. And by the way, that's an article that people often use to say that Israeli settlements in Judea Samaria are illegal. I don't know of anyone who's ever been forced by the Israeli government to live there. So Article 49 specifically refers to forced movements of populations. However, the very same article 49 explicitly says that it does permit forced population transfer, quote, if the security of the population or imperative military reasons so demand. The article goes on to say that moving civilians entirely out of that territory, so not just around Gaza, but even out of Gaza, is permitted, quote, when for material reasons it is impossible to avoid such displacement. And clearly, there's no place to live in Gaza right now. There's no infrastructure, there's no homes, there's insufficient food. The place is not habitable, and turning it into a construction zone would make it even worse. So even just aside from the morality, specifically under international law, this moving Palestinians out of Gaza is absolutely permitted in this particular case. And finally, something to think about, Israeli hostages are still being held captive. And so next time you hear someone who claims to be an expert on international law talking about how terrible it is to move Palestinian civilians, if that expert does not say anything about the Israeli hostages, which is also a violation of international law, then you're talking to someone who's not only getting the law wrong, but who also is probably hypocritical and perhaps lacking in a human soul, to put it a little bit bluntly. So that is a very quick overview of some of the things that are happening right now, some of the policies, not the person, but the policies, some of the law and morality and values that lies behind them. I understand these things are difficult for American Jews to wrestle with, but you should know that Israeli Jews have pretty strong consensus on these issues, which is very unusual for Israel. And hopefully the things that I've said will help you think through your thoughts and opinions and enrich some of your opinions as well. Not necessarily change them, but at least enrich them. And if you still decide that you disagree with the Israeli consensus, at least you'll have a deeper understanding of why. So I hope that was helpful to everyone. And now let's take some questions.
Thank you very much. I am sure that everybody enjoyed it and learned something from this. I did forget to mention at the very beginning, because I'm sure some of you didn't read the complete bio of Dan, but Dan is a lawyer. And therefore, when he says that he is very, very careful about everything he puts in his articles, having to, make sure that it complies with the law, and he checks all the facts and checks everything with the laws, that's not because he's just some person who happens to like legal stuff, but he really and truly is a lawyer. So, and I put in the chat in a couple places, if you want to get all of Dan's newsletters and sign up to be on his email list, you can go to realitycheckresearch.org, and you will be able to sign up to be on his mailing list, and you will get all of these newsletters, which come quite often, especially since things change here in Israel every day, practically. In fact, how many did you say you did this week alone, Dan? I mean, there were
I wrote 3 articles in 3 days this week, which is unusual for me.
unusual, but I mean, one day,
Yeah.
something about the Red Cross, and then the next day something else, and the next day something else. So
It's a lot. And
constantly,
each of those articles is a significant investment of time and resources.
right. Oh, and now I see that Dan put on a Substack link, and that you can see all the old posts in addition to signing up on his regular email list.
So if there's something I mentioned today that you feel like you wanted to see the links or my sources for that, you can go to the Substack, and that will show you all the old posts that you've already seen if you get my emails. And then in those posts, they're all titled very clearly. You can go to the relevant one and find the links to the sources.
Okay, Alana is going to.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you, Dan, would you rather that I read the questions, or would you like to read the questions?
Yeah, sure. Why don't you do it? It'll feel more like a conversation that way.
Okay. I think you've gotten more questions than most people who speak to us. But the first one, as I hope an easy one, is Daniel any relation to Brad Pomerantz?
Not that I know of, but who knows? We're all related here. It's a constant occupational hazard in Israel. You might go on a date and discover it was your cousin.
There you go. That's not good. Sharon's asking, why isn't the Quad organization and others like it also illegal? So why aren't the?
Well, because the freedom of speech, the First Amendment, does apply to citizens. The problem here is that Khalil was violating the terms of his visa. But if you, as a citizen, want to speak in support of a terror organization, you're allowed to do that, just as long as you're not providing material support, such as weapons or financing. It's not a very, I don't think you should speak in favor of terror organizations, but it's not a criminal offense. The First Amendment allows you to do that, but it does violate your visa. When you're a guest in the United States, you can't just do anything you want.
I want to read the next one because I know there's probably a lot of confusion surrounding this. Val, you had asked, Val said she was conflicted about the Red Cross because her daughter's house in Texas burned. The Red Cross was there immediately. They provided assistance for the family, provided housing, and a bunch of other things. So how is she supposed to feel? I think we need to say there's a difference between International Red Cross and the American Red Cross.
That's absolutely true. The International Red Cross, which is the ICRC, the International Committee of the Red Cross, is an entirely different organization from the American Red Cross. The American Red Cross, as far as I know, has never been anti-Semitic or anti-Israel in any particular way. And that's not to say that the International Red Cross doesn't also do some positive things in some places in the world. But in addition to doing those positive things, they also do harmful things. And maybe a different organization like the American Red Cross should take over the ICRC's activities globally.
Sharon's asking, do you try to get governments to defund the International Red Cross?
Well, this is a brand new project, and this is certainly something we're going to do. And like I said, our relationships include people in a number of governments, many people in the U.S. Congress, people in the White House, people in a number of European parliaments, and of course, a lot of people in Israeli government. They read our newsletters, they consult with us, and we speak to them all the time. So that is absolutely a part of what we're going to be doing, speaking to donor nations and encouraging them to revisit their giving strategies.
Barry and Carol want to know, what do you think about Trump's remark calling Schumer a Palestinian and no longer a Jew?
I don't like remarks like that, and I don't like that way of communicating. However, Schumer was speaking in favor of the context behind this was that Schumer was saying that he was going to fight to keep Mahmoud Khalil, the instigator from Columbia University, in the country. Khalil is somebody who's just caused horrible harm to Jewish students, not allowing them to attend class, creating an environment for them that's unsafe and scary and violent. And in addition, has violated the terms of his visa. And I think Schumer could absolutely say, I support free speech, but a visa for a visitor to America does not allow that. This violates the visa's terms, and this isn't a free speech issue. But instead, he's decided to defend someone who supports terrorism. And I don't think he should be doing that. Now, I wouldn't have phrased it in the way that Trump did, but I also am not pleased with the way Schumer's been speaking.
Robin says, does the Israeli public empathize with the hostage families asking to keep the electricity because their loved ones in Gaza are already held in the dark?
I'm trying to figure out how to express this. It's a very Israeli concept. There are people who are saying that not just keep electricity, but that Israel should do everything to bring the hostages back. If that means leaving Hamas in power, if that means giving up Jerusalem, if that means evacuating Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, if that means whatever it takes, do everything. And that is a point of view that some Israelis have, and they have it very fiercely, and my heart goes out to them. There are other Israelis who point out that that if Hamas remains in power, we are setting up the next terror attack and the next taking of hostages. And Yahya Sinwar and many of the people who were working with him were released in the Gilad Shalit hostage release deal. So what was the right thing to do? We brought Gilad Shalit back, but we also created 251 more hostages and many murders as a result. It's one of these questions that there's no right answer to. if I were the prime minister of Israel and I had to make a decision, I don't know how I would go about deciding, and I don't envy the people who have to make that decision. So I'd say, yes, I absolutely empathize with that opinion. And I empathize with the other opinion because I'm out here and I want to be safe too. And I think that anything that increases Hamas's power puts me in danger. And there's no easy answer to this. And that's something that Israelis contend with every single day right now.
Arnie has a broader question. Who lived in the Gaza Strip area prior to May 1948?
Prior to 1940, I don't know that history very well. I know there was Jewish presence there, not as strong as in, say, Judea, Samaria, where there's really like holy sites out there. But there is a record of certain famous rabbis who lived there centuries ago. There was a time when there were various Arabs from Egypt and from other places who lived there. And also just the entire region, its history is that before Israel, it was governed by the British Mandate. Before the British Mandate, it was part of the Ottoman Empire. Before the Ottoman Empire, there were a long line of conquerors, including Greeks and Romans and Crusaders and Babylonians and all sorts of different people. So someone who knows the history with a little more precision than I do could give you more precision on that. But that's basically the overall picture. It's not very different from the history of all the region around it.
Cherie says, why do you call them Palestinians instead of Arabs or Gazans?
It's mostly convenience. I put it this way. I remember this story where somebody was in a debate, not me, and said something like, there's no such thing as a Palestinian. And there was a Palestinian in the room who stood up and said, what are you talking about? I'm right here. And then went on to say, this is the reason why there isn't peace, because those Jews don't even see us as human beings. They don't even see us as existing. He's saying, I don't exist. That's why there's war and suffering. To him, I'm not even real. And wow, that's a strong argument. And so instead of saying they don't exist, because clearly they exist, people exist, what I like to say is that the Palestinian national identity came into being in the 1960s. There were initial movements toward a Palestinian national identity in the 1930s, but it didn't really officially come to play in the 1960s until the 1960s. Before that, it was what was called Arab pan-nationalism. People were proud to consider themselves Arabs and to feel like they had something in common with Arabs throughout the entire region, regardless of the particular country. Don't forget that many of the Arab countries that exist today were created by the British and the French in the 1930s and 40s. Not so much older than Israel, older by maybe 5 years or so, or 10 years. So when I point that out, I'm also pointing out that Palestinians exist, but they kind of created their national identity a very short time ago, whereas the Jewish national identity goes back about 3,000 years, maybe 3,500. That the Jewish presence in Israel goes back approximately 3,000 years. And that I like to say I don't think the irrelevant question is who was here first. The question is, how do we build the appropriate future for ourselves and our children and our grandchildren? But if you insist on talking about who was here first, the Palestinians have existed as a national identity for about 50 years, and Israel has existed for about 3,000.
Just wants to know, has Qatar invited the Gazans to come there?
No, Qatar has been, well, I think there were a number of, every country initially said absolutely not, because we support the Palestinian cause, even if that means forcing Palestinians to stay in a place where they don't want to be themselves, apparently. Since then, a number of countries have come around and said, well, we'll take a few here and a few there. I'm not aware of Qatar having made an offer, although they really should, because remember they had the, it wasn't the Olympics, I think it was the World Cup a year or two ago, and they built an entire World Cup city, kind of like the Olympic Village, including dormitories, and it's empty now. There's just like tons of space and housing that's just sitting empty right there. But I will say this: a lot of people say that there's no way you can make a country take Palestinians if they don't want to. Here's an interesting fact. A lot of people don't know this. The Arab Spring, we remember the Arab Spring began with those protests in Tahrir Square in Egypt, which eventually toppled the Egyptian government and went on to topple governments of other countries. What a lot of people don't know is that actually started about a year earlier when there were forest fires in Russia. And as a result of that, Russia was no longer able to export as much wheat to Egypt as it usually does because a lot of its wheat crop got wiped out. As a result of not getting that inexpensive Russian wheat, Egypt was no longer able to provide subsidies on bread, which it had been doing. And that was the most immediate spark that sparked those Tahrir Square protests in the Arab Spring. What we learned from that is that Egypt's economy is very precarious, and any little push, even a forest fire in Russia, can topple the entire Egyptian government. Now, you add to that the fact that the United States provides billions of dollars in foreign aid to Egypt and to Jordan every year. It's not an exaggeration to say that America could literally end both of them as countries without firing a shot. Because all you do is you take away that aid and suddenly their leaders are hanging from piano wire from a crane somewhere. So the United States has enormous leverage. The question is whether America will actually choose to make use of that leverage.
Larry is asking, what do you see as a feasible long-term solution? Or will there be another pause until there's another buildup and another war?
Well, I think what we've learned about Gaza is that, and I won't tell you what I think, I'll tell you the consensus opinion of most Israelis. What we've learned about Gaza is that, number one, where there's a will, there's a way. If someone wants to attack Israel and kill Israelis, eventually they'll find a way to do it. Deterrence doesn't stop it. Military power doesn't stop it. Fences and electronic sensors don't stop it. Peace agreements don't stop it. For example, the ceasefire agreements we've had, even going back to the Oslo Accords, an interesting fact about the Oslo Accords is if you asked Israelis at the time, do you support the Oslo Accords? Most said yes. If you asked Palestinians, most said yes. There was a follow-up question that they asked that never got much publicity, but you can look it up. And it's in one of my articles. If you ask Israelis, do you see the Oslo Accords as being an end to the conflict? Palestinians or Israelis say yes, obviously. I mean, that's the whole point. We're having peace so that we no longer have this war. Palestinians said no. Something like 77% of Palestinians answered that they do not see the Oslo Accords as being an end to the conflict, but just another step along the way. So what we've learned is that the Palestinian people and the Palestinian government are very clear, and this is not my opinion, this is theirs. They've said it over and over. They want to see an eventual solution that is a final solution. That means taking over all of Israel and killing or exiling everyone in it. That neither peace agreements, nor humanitarian aid, nor deterrence, nor military might, nor political agreements have the ability to stop that. And we learned that on October 7th, if we didn't know it already. The Arab world agrees, and Arab countries say that Palestinians are a national security risk. And so Israelis have come to the conclusion that the only way that we can be safe from Gaza is for Palestinians to no longer be living there. And it may sound like a harsh thing to say, but literally every country in the Arab world, and the Arab world knows Palestinians better than you do and better than I do, tends to adopt exactly the same position, which is why they won't let Palestinians come into their countries. So that's kind of where the Israeli thinking has gotten to at this point. When asked about a Palestinian state in the early 2000s, 70% of Israelis supported it. Now 70% of Israelis oppose it. And so that's where we are now.
Just an IT issue on the site. And I don't know if anyone else tried to sign up for emails, tried to subscribe on realitycheckresearch.org. Let us know if you had trouble with it. Elaine had trouble. She said after she filled everything out and pressed submit button, she got no URL found for this tracker ID.
Okay, I'll definitely take a look at that and make sure that it's working.
Okay.
If for any reason it doesn't work for you, feel free to send Pamela. If it doesn't work for you, Pamela will take your email address and we'll accumulate a little list for me, and I'll add it manually. And in the meantime, I'll make sure I
Great.
that it's working there.
Pam, it's Elaine Langer. You can see her on there.
I wrote, yeah, Elaine, you can just put your
Great.
email in chat. I wrote it correctly, didn't I, Dan? Reality check research.
Yeah, you can get there and fill it out.
Yeah.
It's like push it.
I think the link you put right is what they're saying is that when she tried to sign up, the sign up didn't work.
Yeah. I would have done it, but I've already signed up. So
Excuse me, this is Elaine. What did you say I should do? I didn't catch
Just
that
give
last.
your email address to Pamela.
Send me an email, send me a note, and
In the chat?
Yeah, in the chat. Just send it to
Okay.
Pam with your email address and
To
she'll
Pam?
Yeah.
To Pam.
Pam. Yes. Okay.
Thank
Sure. Are you okay to keep going? I think there's like one more question. So I guess one more is okay.
Only now, because,
Uh,
because you guys changed your time and we didn't, so.
oh, right. I forgot. For
Yeah,
like
we're
20
moving
days,
stuff
I
up.
think, right? It's exciting. Why the sign from the river to the sea, distributed to protesters by the organizers like Khalil, is not considered a direct call to violence and a sufficient basis for legal actions? So I guess why is it not?
Well, okay. First of all, when you're talking about um, the when you're talking about citizens, there's a First Amendment issue.
Oh.
So a non-citizen is not allowed to even um, support verbally a terror organization that violates the terms of their visa. A citizen can support a terror organization verbally, but cannot provide material support. From the river to the sea, you would have to show that it's a tricky thing, and I wonder if you brought a lawsuit, how it would play out, because it's one of those things that's right on the line. First of all, you'd have to show intent. You'd have to show that the person understands what the implication of river to the sea is, which a lot of people don't. You'd have to show that they really mean that. You'd have to show that they don't just mean that they want to like saying that you think Israel shouldn't exist as a state is not necessarily the same thing as calling for violence against Jewish students or calling for violence against Israelis. It's just saying that it's just a policy point of view. Maybe they could argue that. So you end up in this place where you have to prove what a person's subjective intent was. That's the legal term, subjective intent. How do you prove subjective intent? Well, you have to find out what this person was saying in their private life, maybe the things that they've written online, maybe they think maybe you can get witnesses from their life who would testify that they said, oh, the reason I'm waving this sign is because I want to kill Jews, things like that. And you would probably also need to show that what they're doing is reasonably likely to cause others to act and actually carry out that violence. So there's a lot of things that you need to prove, and proving them involves a lot of these subjective intent things that are very hard to do. So theoretically, it could be done, but it's not an easy thing to do. And so we'll kind of see how things play out. But when the White House takes a position, or even when a state or local government takes a position, they usually want to take a position that they're pretty sure they're going to win. So the reason the White House is deporting Khalil is because what he's doing fits squarely into those INA rules where he's violating his visa. Then there may be other people who have actually if someone has actually carried out violence, like if they occupied a campus building and beat up the security guard, that's clearly assault and battery. So you're going to see, I think, now more and more cases that really fit squarely within the rules. And eventually there may be other cases where they'll go after the river to the sea folks. But what you find in politics is that if you get a good few wins on the board, someone gets deported, someone else gets imprisoned, a few good things happen there, then it tends to have what's called in law a chilling effect. And then you just see a lot less of all the other stuff because people know, without looking too much in depth, that people are getting arrested, deported, and what have you. So this is the direction that the White House is going right now, and they're trying to go in the direction where they're really highly certain of getting a win, and not if they were to get overruled by the court and overruled on appeal, because they might get overruled in court, but they'll certainly appeal, that would really take the wind out of the sails of what they're trying to do.
I actually have a question. I know most of us probably, I know I was thrilled when I heard that there would be hell to pay. Is there a fear in Israel? And again, I have this fear that they were just words. Trump already said the hostages needed to come back by X date, or there'll be hell to pay. And I know he said that Israel can obviously make its own decision, which is great in its own right. Thanks, but he's hinted at the U.S. maybe carrying out like military efforts there with Israel. But in reality, do we believe that there will be hell to pay? Is Israel afraid it's just words? There's talk of this.
Yeah, it is a fear, but obviously only time will tell. So far, Israel's cut off the flow of humanitarian goods, I'm not saying
Right.
humanitarian aid because water and electricity are still flowing, but the goods in general have stopped. And the White House has supported that. So we already see an example of the White House being supportive in a way that they weren't before.
Sure. Definitely.
Another example is what's concerning people right now. Now, the reason when Trump said if the hostages aren't all released by this date, there will be hell to pay, and Israel didn't go back to war, that's because we were still in the middle of hostage releases, and going to war would have stopped that. And Israel wants to get as many hostages as possible. So then the next idea was, well, maybe we can get Hamas to buy more time by giving us hostages in exchange for a couple weeks. Unfortunately, what's happened is 11 or 12 days have passed during which no hostages are being released and there's no agreement, which means Hamas is getting time for free. And that's starting to worry Israelis because Hamas is realizing they have a technique that works, that they're getting time for free. Meanwhile, they're probably also rebuilding their forces, and every day that goes by benefits them. And in the meantime, hostages are still in captivity. So we're getting none of our priorities met right now. So that is worrying to Israelis. But I think Israelis also have a sense that so far, in little ways, the White House is already demonstrating a level of support that wasn't there before. Israelis don't have a sense that we need American troops in Gaza. We don't think that American troops are going to be more effective than Israeli troops are. Israeli troops know the terrain better and are trained as well as anyone. But having that support, now we have equipment. We were starting to run low on supplies, and because supply had been cut off by the United States, knowing that we can fight the war properly, as in not supplying aid to enemy combatants, and that we will be supported in doing that, knowing that Israel can use weapons where and when it needs to, and that if there are some civilian casualties, it's not going to shut everything down right away. Not that Israel targets civilians. Israel never does that, but sometimes Hamas puts civilians in the way, and Israel needs to be able to function despite Hamas's tool of doing that. So those are kind of all the ways in which an Israeli combat scenario would be different now than it was in the past. But don't forget that this is not the only theater of action right now. And there was a military exercise recently where an American bomber plane was flying, being escorted by Israeli fighter jets, which is an indication to Iran that Israel and the United States might carry out an attack on Iran. Just to give you a sense of scale, the largest explosive that Israeli fighter jets can carry is a 2,000-pound bomb. The largest explosive that the Israeli bombers carry. So Israel doesn't have a bomber. Israel has fighter jets. A bomber, it's not maneuverable. It doesn't fight. It's like a big cargo plane that just carries bombs. And the American bombers can carry a 30,000-pound bomb. So that's 15 times more powerful than the 2,000-pound bomb. And that's important because a lot of these nuclear sites are under mountains. And the way you get on, there are techniques Israel can use. For example, you can drop a bomb, which creates a crater in this mountain, and then you fly over and drop another bomb into the center of that crater. So now you get even a little bit lower, and then a third one. And that's actually how Israel got Nasrallah in Beirut when he was hiding down in that bunker. They had to drop multiple bombs, each one inside the crater that the previous bomb had made, so that you could get all the way down. But dropping a 30,000-pound bomb can do that much more effectively. And when you're talking about a mountain, you may actually need more than one 30,000-pound bomb to get all the way in. So this is a significant step, and of course, Iran is ultimately behind the funding for all of the dangers that Israel has been facing up until now. And Israel is keeping an eye on the Iranian theater and keeping an eye on what we need to do to make that kind of action possible for us to carry out. Instead of, so that we're dealing with Gaza, but also available to deal with whatever we need to do in Iran. And by the way, when I say that Iran is behind every danger Israel's been facing up until now, that's because there are some new dangers. With the fall of the Alawite regime in Syria and Bashar al-Assad, he was a proxy of Iran. But the new person, which is Julani, he's former ISIS, former Al-Qaeda, not even really former, he just sort of rebranded himself. And as you know, there was this massacre where the new Syrian government just shot 1,000 people to death. And Turkey is making inroads into Syria. So Iran is this sort of Shiite axis. They also support Sunni groups, such as Hamas is Sunni. But then you also have this whole Sunni axis, which is backed by countries like Qatar and Turkey, and aligned with Al-Qaeda and ISIS, and that's right on Israel's border as well. So getting rid of Iran's nuclear program or even ending the Iranian government will reduce some of the threats facing Israel and the United States, but not all of them.
Great. Thank you. There's one more question. I lied. Are you or will you be involved in the work of the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs Communications Task Force for monitoring international media reports on Israel?
You know, we try to coordinate with all of the Israeli government bodies as much as we possibly can. What we find is sometimes they're a little bit day late and a dollar short. So usually we tend to end up just moving ahead and doing things and trying to convince them to come along and be helpful. But I was just introduced to the task force, and hopefully something will come of it. We're certainly looking to be helpful in any way we can. We consult with people from the foreign ministry frequently, but Israel has often been rather slow on the uptake and slow on understanding just how important it is to communicate internationally. The Israeli idea is sometimes along the lines of, you know, it's important to do military things. It's important to fund hospitals, but we don't care about communications. That's just a bunch of people talking, except when suddenly your IDF forces no longer have things like the weapons they need or the equipment they need or the international support, or IDF soldiers have arrest warrants around them all over the world. All of that stems from a failure to properly communicate who we are and what we're doing. And I think slowly Israelis are beginning to catch on to that. But that's why what we do is so important and so hard, because we're out there just doing what needs to be done, sometimes with support, sometimes without it. But our organization is supported entirely by individuals like you who care about what's going on. We don't have funding from the Israeli government. We help them as much as we can, but they rarely realize the importance of funding groups like us or funding the specific projects that we do. So if you care about the work that we're doing, both in terms of persuading people and communities, in terms of giving you information that you need in your life and in your community, and also in terms of our work in persuading governments and elected officials, then know that you are the backbone behind what makes our work possible.
I think that's everything in the chat. People are welcome to unmute if you want to ask a question.
Yeah. Oh, and also let me just add, we are a 501c3 charitable organization, and donations to us are tax deductible.
Oh, great. We have had quite a few people, I think, say that they're going to sign up, which is wonderful.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And that means a lot. And I'm glad to have you in our community.
All right. Does anyone?
Sorry. Spread the word, because the newsletters are and the articles are
great,
very interesting and very timely.
Yeah. Anyone else have any more questions for Dan? Already asked a lot.
I have a comment, if you can hear me.
Hi, Stanley.
I want to thank VFI for your support to help put Daniel on the web. Thank you, VFI. Number two, and my wife tells you every day, you're beautiful. Number three, you will have some of my financial support as well. Thank you for what you do for I'm Yisrael Chai. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing those kind words.
Thanks, Stanley. Comments, questions? I think that's it.
Great. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dan, for yet again coming in and giving us all this really important information, and for being there to answer all the questions. Is someone asking something?
I will. Thank you again, Daniel.
If someone's talking, mute yourself.
I think it's Stanley again.
That's all right. I just
Dan, if you're talking to someone else, mute yourself, or you mute.
I did it. Okay, Pam, anything else?
No, thank you, Dan. You all have to understand that Dan does this out of the goodness of his heart, because because VFI is, in his heart from many years ago, and
Yes. Right. No, it's from my heart, and nobody's paying me to be here tonight. I'm here because I love you guys.
Right. So please sign up and donate.
Yeah, because when he goes on all the news shows, they pay him. So no, he's happy to do this, and he comes quite often to us.
He does.
However, in a couple more weeks, when we change our time back, Dan, then it's gonna be late again. So
yeah, but there are porn parties coming up, so we're working on
from everybody. Dan can go and have a good time now.
and thank you for talking to us on Purim.
Thanks, guys.
That was
Talk
not
soon again.
ideal.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Anyone who would love to stay or would like to stay, you don't have to love to stay. You could like to stay to do the schmooze. You're welcome. If not, feel free to go, and we'll see you the next time we have a program, which I believe is next week. Maybe I should tell you what it is. We're having a speaker, Baruch Frank, talk about what it's like for the Israelis who are volunteering to work and rebuild and restore the kibbutzim along the borders where they were destroyed. So if you'd like to join us again, that would be great. Same time, same day, and you'll be getting invitations shortly in your email. Feel free to unmute.